Hey guys, what's up? This is going to be a video about my custom intake here. This is still just the prototype. Pretty version will be coming later. So I want to talk a little bit about what is wrong with the typical intakes that you find for the 96 to 97 3.8 liter Camaro and Firebird. Pretty much, we still have the angled throttle body, so to get the one that comes up over the radiator is not easy, and also just not good because of all the kinks that you have to make in it. Now there's multiple other cold air intakes for this car. They usually go down in there, or you can get the short ram like you have seen on mine before that I made the heat shield for. The only problem with that is the diameter of the throttle body opening is much larger than those cold air intakes. So it kind of presents a restriction in and of itself. But yeah, the cold air intakes you'll find for this, not only is the diameter too small, but one of them in particular has the pipe go up like this and then has a crazy S-bend right before the throttle body, as if the bends weren't bad enough. The other thing people like to do to try and net power is to take the screen out of the throttle body. The problem with that is the screen is actually there for a reason, and that reason is because when air is having to go around a bend or an angle of sorts, it becomes very turbulent and it fluctuates. So the MAF sensor is getting all different kinds of readings at different times. So what I did was I did take the screen out, but I did this the proper way, and that is to relocate the MAF sensor into a straight section of pipe. Now the MAF sensor is supposed to be in a section of straight pipe that on either side of it is the length is equal to twice the diameter of the pipe. So this is a 3.5 inch pipe, so it needs 7 inches on either side. This actually has about 8 inches on each side. Now I have noticed a couple of things that I gotta change here with this intake. Like I said, this was just the prototype. I wanted to see on the dyno if it worked or not. One thing is, this is a 45-degree bend. Of course, stores don't carry anything anymore, so I had to order it, and after a week of waiting I found out that's the wrong bend. So this is actually going to be changed to a 60-degree bend. A 90 is way too much. This MAF sensor does have to be clocked this way. That's the other thing you gotta pay attention to, is you can't just kind of throw that in whatever direction you want. What I'm going to try and do is measure it out again with a new section of pipe. I think I've got enough to the point that I can bring the MAF sensor down here. That way the plug isn't interfering with this, and I can still use my rad cover, which you'll notice is not here currently. The air intake sensor down there too is resting on the hose a bit. I would like to bring that like up here. This did net more power and torque on the dyno, and it held it out longer instead of dropping off like crazy at the end of the RPM range. This would actually hold the power steady, and I'll show those graphs as well. This filter is just a Spectre dry filter. It's a 9-inch, just so it fills up this area. Another thing that I'm going to do is, when I had the other cold air intake, I had the heat shield here, just this section, nothing more. That did make a huge difference. So with this one, what I'm going to do is, you'll notice, like I said, cold air intakes sometimes go down here. There's pockets over here and there. So that's where all the cold air can be. I'm going to actually make a custom box for it that cuts all this off and covers here too. So literally the only place to draw air is from those 3 areas. So now I'll get to the dyno sheet so I can show you how much more power and torque it made, as well as how it held the power. Hey guys, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, hit the subscribe button right down there. Give me a like or dislike if you want, and drop a comment on what you thought about the video. If you really do like the video and know somebody that would like to watch it, definitely give it a share. Alright, so now to create a little proof of numbers here and to show why everything's a little inconsistent. So the first dyno, you'll notice on this graph that between the first run and the last run, I did have a significant gain. Now what I didn't know at the time was that Powerdyne system was reading exponentially high. I didn't think anything of it because my horsepower numbers, as you can see, said 204. Now it is not uncommon, it's actually quite common for after a vehicle tune that you make horsepower at the wheels equal to what is rated at the crank originally. So with this being factory rated at 200 crank horsepower, 204 rear wheel horsepower seemed actually correct to me at the time. Now it seems that that may not have been the case. It was probably a little bit lower. I'm estimating that that dyno was reading probably 5 to 7% high. Now if you'll notice on these graphs of my most recent dyno, that it doesn't even read rear wheel horsepower anywhere near what my stock crank horsepower would be. Considering I can show you that in the first graph I made gains between first and last, and in these graphs I can show you I've made gains between first and last, you know that the horsepower is definitely going up constantly. So this reading around 194 horsepower seemed off to me, so I actually asked about this. Apparently I found out that the dyno I'm using on what's called the software WinPep 8 is discovered to run 5% lower. So if I'm running about 5% lower on this dyno, and I was running about 5 to 7% higher on the Powerdyne, so you gotta say it's probably about 12 to 13% difference here. So I'm going to take this calculation and I'm going to try and figure out what I actually have now. So if I take into account that the old dyno was reading about 7% high, I'll take those numbers, 204, and we'll say it's about 7% high, so times that by 0.93, so that means I should have had a roughly 189 to 190 horsepower. And then we see on this dyno that converted out to like 183, so it's still lower than what we just calculated. Like I said, let's say this is reading 5% low. 183 times 1.05, so 192. So I'm roughly in the ballpark now. So just to be on the safe side and kind of even things out, we'll say it's a 13% difference. So if I do a 13% difference to try and get my actual horsepower and torque ratings, we're going to take the 193.99, so just 194, multiply by, we said, about 13% to even it out. So that would be 219. Now that sounds about where it should be. Like I said, I should have made about my crank horsepower after the initial tune. Seemed like it was a little bit lower still. Now after each time of increasing horsepower, it sounds about right that it'd be almost 20 horsepower above the stock rated crank horsepower. Now let's look at the torque. The torque is 223. Multiply that by, again, the 13%. So I'm at 251.99, so 252 rear wheel torque. Alright, so with this intake, what you can see by this comparison graph is a couple things actually. So one, I made about 10 more horsepower, same RPM at 5,000. The max torque, however, actually made 8 more, and instead of being at 3,500 RPMs, was actually made at 4,000 RPMs. Now if we look at the end of the recording here, right past 5,700 RPMs, we'll see a couple different things here. Well, let's take a look at the bold lines first, which is the horsepower. So you'll see at the end there, it was 158 horsepower, and it dropped off relatively quickly. The new horsepower line is 183, and you'll see it's a lot straighter. So it not only has more horsepower at the end, it's carrying it through better. And same goes for the torque. This is the lighter lines. So you'll see the first run is 145, and on the new run, it's 168. So again, I've carried through more power at the end of the RPM range. In this final graph, you'll see that on one of my first runs there, I actually ended up stopping the run just after 5,600 RPMs. That would be because I had this originally limited because it was just pointless after that to have it keep going. As you can see from the red bold line and the red light line, the horsepower and the torque just started to take a nosedive. It fell off even harder by the time it hit 6 grand. But now, if you look at the bold blue line and the light blue line, it actually carries out to about 6 grand. And you'll notice that if I did go all the way to 6 grand, I just kind of hit the button a little preemptively on this recording. You'll notice that it's only just then starting to drop in power to the 160 mark, like the first run was around 5,700. And you'll notice that the torque as well is doing the same thing. We're shooting about another 300 RPMs up, and it's only just then starting to hit as low as the first run did. Now here's the cleaner graph for you where it's just the final run, and I've moved the power and torque bar out of the way of the lines. But you'll see the air-fuel ratio stays about a constant 13. And then take a look at the torque. It starts pretty much right at 200, right at 2,000 RPMs. And then just goes up and up. It'll carry the peak torque between 3,500 RPMs and about 41. And then it'll finally start to drop off. And if you look at the horsepower, it's a nice straight line going up. There's a little bit of a flat line right around like 4,700 to 4,800. Then goes up again, then flatlines some, but still carries out a little bit. And you'll notice at the end it does try to flatline again instead of completely dipping off. Alright, so there you go, guys. This is what the difference in the intake actually will make for the vehicle when it's properly sized. The screen's taken out and the MAF is relocated with the screen being removed as it should be, along with a dyno tune to make sure that the air-fuel ratio is actually where it should be. Then you'll be able to make very adequate power with the proper intake setup now that I've designed. Like I said, this was only a prototype, so I am going to do it probably once more once I have the 60-degree bend and I coat the intake piping and also put on a box that keeps from any hot air ever touching it. Granted, on the dyno, it probably really didn't receive any hot air from the engine bay, considering the hood was straight up open and there was a bunch of fans. It's pretty much just going to be to double check that everything's alright.